Okay, we're live. Welcome back to the Hill of Roses, where we come once again to celebrate the best contributors to our independent policy movement for progress to bring power to people like you. With us on the program today, we're going to be talking to Nelson Orta, a contributor here at the Hill of Roses. We're going to be having a discussion today about two different subjects, both of which are of varying levels of importance. One is what is the most important thing that we love to talk about on this program a lot, which is democracy reform and specifically mail-in voting. And then the other part of today's conversation is going to be surrounding, a more entertaining, less important topic. We're going to be talking about the conventions. With that being said, let's get into today's conversation and let's get to hear what Nelson has to think about these conventions. As you heard my preview on those thoughts this past Friday when we were talking to the People's Party group. Let's get into it. Okay, we got Nelson here. Nelson, how you doing, man?
Hi, John. Great to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you. The last time we had you here on the program, we were getting to talk about your article on Rwanda's reconciliation. And today we're getting to talk about the other part of subjects that you get to cover here on the network in democracy reform, as well as some of the current events. And I wanted to hear, because I know this is something that you're currently working on. You're working on a piece for mail-in voting. Can you let everyone out there know, why this became such a focus that you wanted to drill down on?
Well, I mean, the biggest reason is because of COVID-19. There's a bigger interest in voting by mail, including by people who don't normally vote by mail, like myself. I usually go out to the polls, early voting, worst case
Yeah.
scenario, election day. But, absentee voting, you would associate that with, say, older voters, people in the military, and just people who have special reasons to vote. But this year, due to the fear of COVID-19, there's been a stronger interest in voting by mail.
And so, voting by mail is something that we've already had in place in a large respect in many states throughout the country. Not like all of them yet, but we've had this in various locations. Why do you think, in your opinion, this has become such a hot button topic instead of something that seems like kind of a no-brainer?
Well, there are several reasons. First of all, we have 5 states that do an automatic vote by mail system, and those are Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, Utah, and I'm blanking out on it. I think it's Alaska, but it's like I'm pretty sure it's those 5. But secondly, there are a lot of states where they have no excuse mail-in voting, so people can do that whether you need an excuse or not. But you do have several states that have a requirement. You have to be of a certain age, or you have a disability, or you have work requirements, or you're going to be working abroad, or whatever. So then this year there have been most of those states with the restriction have allowed a COVID-19 exemption. However, there were 4 that did not have the exemption initially. So there were Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Texas.
So, in your opinion, this has kind of become a topic of, these are really focused on swing states. My question for you is, given that this is traditionally for voters that tend to be older in nature, and this has tended to be what the conservative base is in many election cycles, why do you think this has actively been a step that, the Republican administration has been trying to hinder? I'm curious, in your opinion, why you foresee they felt a need to attack this, because I know this is actually something that is causing a little bit of a disconnect within the Republican Party with, Trump even at points saying that they wanted to save the USPS, but then he warns about mail-in voting. He has had Republican allies who have been trying to actually get through mail-in voting so that they can get those older voters. Why do you think that the Republican Party has tried to create this barrier for mail-in voting potentially?
I think it's several reasons. First of all, Republicans have generally had an advantage with mail-in voting because older voters tend to be more Republican, whereas younger voters tend to be more Democrat, and also going out to polls. So they already had an advantage there. But if younger voters wanted to then vote by mail this time around,
Yeah.
that changes the equation. And then, secondly, there is a deeper part of it. In the South, there's a lot of voter intimidation, and it's been happening for decades, especially in minority neighborhoods and districts. And if everyone is able to vote by mail, that limits voter suppression tactics.
Okay. So basically, it makes it a little bit harder to suppress it through their normal tactics. So they want to make sure that they can
Oh
get
yeah.
it in there. Can you let for the folks out there, one of the common ways they try and get away with this tactic is that they say that mail-in voting has concerns about, the integrity of the ballot. That they believe that this could be a way for them to manipulate, how many votes people potentially can have, dead people voting, etc. Is there any merit to this claim, in your opinion?
Well, there have actually been I don't know the exact number, but it's been very, very few cases of voter fraud by mail specifically. And on top of that, try to just imagine this. They send out hundreds of millions, or rather tens of millions of mail-in ballots to people's homes or PO boxes or whatever, and it's going to that person. And in order to commit fraud, try collecting everybody's mail-in ballot right when the mailman comes on each and every one of those days that it actually gets there, picking it up, filling it out, and then sending it. That is logistically really, 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 really difficult to do. So one of the concerns is people who do assist others on filling out their forms. There are volunteer groups that have people go out and go to senior citizens, all legitimately and with good intentions, and actually help them fill out a form. And depending on your state, there might be a little signature for witnesses, and there might even be another box for people who are not just witnesses, they are also assisting. I did that one time when I was in San Antonio, Texas, back in 2013, and the laws are actually very, very strict.
Okay. So, I also think that, there's a large extent to people don't understand what is the consequence if they are caught with this problem. Because I think some people are like, oh, it's just a slap on the wrist. But really, there are some quite severe consequences for voter fraud. Do you
Mhm.
happen to know offhand what those penalties ensure? Obviously, it might vary state by state, but can you let people know what the potential downside is for maybe a couple of extra votes if they were even considering this type of voter fraud?
Well, generally, if they do fall into voter fraud or election fraud, there are federal laws that deal with that and also state laws. And then on top of all that, you're still dealing with the US Postal Service, which has its own set of laws. So there could be some kind of, breaking of a federal law by messing with the USPS.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think part of this has also been that there is more than just a mail-in voting concern. It's just a general mail service concern now. That a lot of this effort has been, frankly, to the benefit of companies like the Amazons of the world, potentially, with how they've been trying to manipulate the mail service. Do you think that this is really all about the mail-in voting, or do you think it was multiple things that they were just always looking to try and privatize the postal service? What do you think is the big reason why they're trying to make it harder for people to just do mail?
Given that it was so soon before a general election, within 90 days, I mean, it's obvious that they tried to slow down postal services for this reason. And then there were also unintended consequences. There were stories about companies that were sending baby chicks through the mail, and they would show up dead, and other
Yeah.
horrible things. And then on top of that, um, just aside,
Medication too.
exactly, yeah. Aside from all that, there are pharmaceutical drugs that are sent out to veterans, senior citizens. There are um, there are checks going in the mail, bills being paid and checks coming in. So there's just so much happening through the mail, even in the year 2020, even with Amazon services, even with online banking and all that, stuff still happens in the mail.
Hmm. So the last question I wanted to ask you on this subject before transitioning to talking about the conventions is I wanted to hear, in your opinion, what could be done to improve the processes of mail-in voting and just the postal services in general?
Well, with regards to mail in voting, the best thing is apply to vote by mail as early as you can. That's the first thing. Secondly, I would not leave it in a mailbox or even a post box, a post box. I would go straight to the nearest USPS location, or better yet, there are other options. Like in the state of Florida, I believe that you can go through the supervisors of elections offices. So there are county offices available in most states, and then on top of that, there are states that do allow polling locations to receive mail-in ballots. So it depends on where your state is and possibly the county within your state. And secondly, your other question was, I'm sorry, could you repeat the second question?
General, just mail services. I think a
Yeah.
lot of people are nervous about the overall health of the mail services in general. What do you think we could be doing there to just help it be secured from not getting privatized?
Well, I think with this whole incident, we've come to actually appreciate the USPS still existing, still providing services. And, we got to keep in mind that with the USPS, there are rural areas where companies like FedEx, UPS might charge a lot more than what the USPS could be charging. And secondly, what we can also do is expand the services regarding the USPS, such as postal banking. It's a something that Bernie Sanders has proposed.
Okay. Yeah, certainly gaining some new revenue streams would help them have some financial stability. I would personally say, one of the big culture shifts that America just simply needs to go through is just understanding there's a reason we have public services and they're not,
Mhm.
for profit entities. It's that we expect a public good to come out of it. We don't expect, the libraries to turn a profit. Maybe we can utilize these places more, as you said, postal banking,
Mhm.
but that these inherently are just things that we know societally are going to benefit us, and that you don't always need the government to turn a profit on anything. Frankly, when they do turn a profit, it often means that, well, they're taking money from the people. They're taking more money in than they're giving in value out. So I frankly think there is just a cultural shift that needs to
Yep.
understand these services. With that being said, let's now talk about the second part of our conversation. We've had the past couple of weeks, conventions, the
Mhm.
big pageants of election season, and I wanted to hear your general sentiments. Did you happen to watch the Democratic, Republican, and even People's Convention from the past 2 weeks?
Okay, so I have been traveling recently, and I was able to watch the Democratic convention um, in a proper location. But with the Republican convention, I was actually out camping, but I did have access to local television where I was able to watch some of it, but not all of it.
Sure.
And then with regarding the People's Convention, I was able to watch some of it, mostly just the bigger names on there.
Okay. And so, in your opinion, just from what you've heard from that Republican convention and what you saw in the Democratic convention, how did you feel in terms of just general effectiveness with the time that they had, that both of the parties delivered? Do you think either party was more effective in delivering a message for the general populace?
I'm not sure who was more effective. I think they were effective in different ways.
Okay.
Like the Democratic convention, it was overall very inclusive, and it was especially inclusive to Republicans. You noticed that there was John Kasich,
Yeah.
Colin Powell, people who are Republicans coming on there. And their goal was to appeal to the Republicans. But at the same time, within the Democratic convention, it was also missed opportunities to reach out to more progressive candidates. They had Bernie Sanders and AOC, which was great, but they could have actually expanded that and added more people, more members of the squad who mostly have won their re-elections. I think Ayanna Pressley is the only one on the squad who is she's on the ballot tomorrow, I think, in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
However, she's not being primaried, so your point
yeah.
still
Well, yeah. So
to be getting
technically,
through.
she hasn't got in, but yeah. But anyways, they could have added the squad, and that was their biggest mistake, not being inclusive towards progressives. Now, the RNC, they put on a better show overall. And I did see a comment from a guy named James Treacle. I think he's, yeah.
Mhm.
And he mentioned that from a production perspective, they put on a better show simply because it was at the White House, which may or may not be violating the Hatch Act. And then on top of that, you saw an audience where they were not wearing masks, and which is not safe. So you saw this vibrant audience. They were clapping for the president, and on top of that, what it seemed like was they were proposing that they would prevent the apocalypse that they're responsible for.
Yeah, that certainly seemed like a common theme throughout like the RNC, the frequent mention of, quote unquote Biden's America when
Oh
there
yeah,
is no Biden's America yet.
right.
I think is certainly foolhardy. But to your first point, I wanted to just say I do agree with you. I don't think they made a lot of mention of Democrats, and I think part of it's not Democrats only, but progressive Democrats.
Progressive, yeah,
Mainly, in my opinion, it was partially because they were trying to like show to these kind of conservative swing voters, hey, we're not them. But I do think you're right that they didn't even give enough of a taste to even like placate that like the progressive base.
yeah,
Like for example, I don't know if you needed the whole squad. I think it would have been good. I would have been happy with it. But if you simply gave AOC more of an opportunity than just the
yep,
nomination process of Bernie Sanders, a tradition that is in every single convention, but
mm-hmm.
somehow this year got misconstrued as a rebellious act from the media, I think would have been very kind. It would have given her the opportunity to actually make the case for Joe
Yep,
Biden being the better candidate. And, a lot of people actually really care about what AOC has to say. And those people right now, as we're about to talk about, are considering alternative parties. And so I think having her give an opportunity to say why Joe Biden is the best option would have been a really good opportunity. It's not necessarily like they have to champion all the democratic socialist message in that speech. I get you don't want that message, but like just giving her the opportunity to expand more and say why she is part of this Democratic Party, I think would have went a long way for them. And to your point about the showmanship, I agree. I think the RNC's was definitely a better produced version, but they had this tendency where they basically, in my opinion, always tried to look at like one part of a group and define it as the whole group. And I think it's a trick where I think if you like are one of those kind of low information voters where you're accepting what is being said to you at face value and you believe it, I think they put on a very convincing message. But for people who kind of are those more informed voters, I think it would be endlessly infuriating like, to
oh
have to
yeah.
go through that. Do you think that the conventions, one way or another, will have moved the needles?
I don't think that they'll move them much. except with a point towards the Democrats appealing to Republicans, because there were a lot of Republicans 4 years ago who were not enthused about voting for Donald Trump, or they may have actually voted third party, wrote in another name like John McCain, Mitt Romney, or somebody else, and or they may not have voted at all 4 years ago. And there are Republicans who do regret not actually fighting Trump and actually supporting Hillary. So this time around, uh, there are Republicans available, even in swing states, who may want to actually vote Democrat, including previous Trump voters, including them. So I think that was the biggest gamble with the Democratic convention, which was being very inclusive to Republicans. I think that was an enormous gamble, and we're going to find out. And the other thing is that they mentioned like a lot of military leaders who are generally conservative Republicans, and they're coming out in favor of Biden. We keep hearing about all these old national security types who are just coming out in favor of Biden. And I saw a poll today from Military Times that showed among active duty soldiers, that Joe Biden is leading Trump 43 to 37, whereas 4 years ago, candidate Trump then had a 20-point lead on Hillary Clinton among active duty soldiers. So that's a big swing. That's a very big swing, and nobody's really talking to active duty soldiers or veterans in general. So that's like a big mystery right there. Like how much of a swing would go from soft support from Trump to soft support to Joe Biden this time around?
Yeah, I think that's certainly interesting. I think there's also that, opposite side of the coin. I thought one of the things that was interesting was that the Republicans, maybe sans Tom Cotton in his speech, were largely trying to give this anti-war messaging at the same time as saying they were bolstering our military capabilities. So I think that can also kind of, with some of those more independent, maybe even potentially libertarian types of voters, they might end up going to Trump for that potential cause. One thing I wanted to ask you about is, when we look at the past month, we've seen some shifting in the polls. Right now, it looks like Trump has been gaining some ground. At the beginning of the month, it was around a 6.2 lead for Joe Biden, and now we're closer to around 2.9 when you look at just the battleground states. What do you think is cause for that, or do you think it's just kind of a fluctuation that it doesn't necessarily trend towards potentially meeting in that middle, it being extra close, but it's just polling over time, it's who you get a sample of? Where do you fall? Do you think it's legitimate, and if so, why do you think that's been happening?
Well, first of all, the polls do fluctuate. They do go up and down. And secondly, we just had the Republican National Convention just last week. And usually what happens is the party that has the convention sees the bump in the polls. And they had theirs last. So what we do have to look out for are how the polls shift over the next few weeks, and then also especially during the debates.
So to that point, what do you think are going to be those key topics for the debates? Like, obviously, there was a lot of different issues that were discussed during the conventions. What do you think are going to be those key points? Or is it just simply a general performance matter? Do you think Biden needs to do anything specifically in those debates to give himself a good chance come the fall?
I have to really think back to the last debate that Biden had with Sanders, the only debate where they were one-on-one in 2020. This was right before the Florida, Arizona, and Illinois primaries. And Bernie Sanders practically called he did call out Joe Biden for being a liar. And then 2 days later, Joe Biden just swept all of those. And the biggest thing that Joe Biden said was in that debate was a phrase that he kept using. Right now, right now, right now. Whereas Bernie Sanders was attacking Joe Biden's senatorial record, he was saying right now, right now, right now. And voters in general will not care what happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. They want to care about what's happening now. How can I protect my family from COVID? How can I get my job back?
Yeah.
And then on top of that, due to the George Floyd protests and the Black Lives Matter protests over this year, police brutality is going to be, and criminal justice will become very, very key issues. And they're clearly taking different sides on this. President Trump is clearly pro-police, and then Biden is somehow trying to find the balance in the middle. And one of his weak points, of course, was the 1994 crime bill, but then you also have to take into account that was back in 1994, a very, very different time in American politics.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think, to your point, you're absolutely right. Like, I think this can potentially get flipped. Like, if Joe Biden is simply on the attack on Donald Trump, I think he could be in a potentially poor spot. I feel like at this point, most voters have heard all of the general attack lines. I think he needs to present, as you said, that what do we need to be doing right now so that people can kind of in their heads internalize, yeah, that would be helping right now. And then seeing the tangible effect that that's not being done right now and that things are not getting better. I think this kind of goes to that point of polling that I was asking about beforehand. I think in large part, it had little to do with the conventions, and it was more of just a general macroeconomic trend. We saw in the past month large recoveries in the market in general. It obviously is not the full gap of what we had lost during this crisis, but we've had jobs recoveries. We've had the stock market going up. I'm not saying that's necessarily the best metric, but a lot of people do see that as an important metric. And so I think that, frankly, is more of how kind of those voters are evaluating. It's like, well, how's my life going right now? If it's sucking, let's go vote for change. If it's doing all right, let's keep the incumbent in. And so I feel like that has a large part of it. And so you're right. We got to emphasize the now and what is not being done. In my opinion, I think Biden simply needs to just not completely fall apart. Like, I think he's had a lot of mixed performances. That last debate he did, I actually thought, despite him getting called on what was legitimately a lie, most voters do not care about the past, nor are they going to be the ones verifying that. They care about the here and now. And some of those performances, he went off the rails. He started having his gaffes. He started talking about the record players. I think if he can simply avoid those styles of gaffes and he can focus on what we need to do now, I think he'll be in a great place. The last question I wanted to pose to you about kind of reacting to the conventions is that we had this past Sunday, and we covered here on the program this past Friday, a People's Party convention. We started to talk about that. Did you happen to have a chance to be able to view that?
I was able to watch some of it, not all of it, but I saw some of the major speakers on the People's Party.
Okay, so my first question to you is just, how do you feel about alternative parties in general right now? Do you think that there is a legitimate case for them? Do you think that you kind of have a half and half approach? You like them, but obviously it's not right yet? Or are you kind of more of just a pure Democratic voter? How do you feel about alternative parties?
Well, in my case specifically, I am a solid Democrat, and that goes back to the year 2000. When I was in college in Florida, I voted Libertarian in an election when Bush won the election by 537 votes. It's a very, very small margin. It's a very, very small margin in a state the size of Florida.
Yeah.
And, between him and Gore, I thought there was not really that much of a difference. But they actually did have tremendous differences with regards to a unilateral approach to foreign policy and a multilateral approach to foreign policy, as Al Gore was. And then we had the Iraq War. And then since then, like, since I've been in Florida voting, all these years, or most of my time as a voter, I have been a Democrat, but I do support progressive candidates who are running for, the House, Senate, and things like that. So I'm like I'm one of those progressives where I'll support them in the primaries, and if they win, great. And if they end up, whoever ends up in the general, I'm like, at that point, okay, I'll vote Democrat, at least for now. So for me, I'm not that big on third parties, but I understand why people do go for them because they feel politically homeless. And in that sense, they are actually important to get other voters out who normally don't go out to vote. So what really is preventing third parties from really taking off are policies like ranked choice voting. We need more of that. Democracy dollars, that we have some kind of campaign funding mechanism for Green Party candidates, Libertarian Party candidates, whatever, future party candidates.
Okay. And so I'd love to ask, obviously you mentioned that you are from Florida,
Yeah.
classic swing state. And so I'd love to ask, how much do you think that specifically influences your desire to just stay a true Democrat versus explore those potential alternate parties? Do you think that it has an impact on how you see them?
I actually do. I actually do. As a Florida voter, I'm gonna vote blue. At the end, because for us, we still will live with a ghost of 2000, and it's like this: when you're in a swing state, your vote actually does make a difference at the presidential level. So in that sense, there is a case to vote third party, and it's by principle, and I respect that. But in my case, and especially this year, I find it personally, it's a duty to take down Trump. Is it to just vote for Joe Biden, get Trump out, and we could very well see progressive challenger in the Democratic primary in 2024. That could very well happen even under a Biden administration, given how things are right now. But that being said, yeah, I think being a swing state voter gravitates me and the state in general towards party loyalists than ideologues.
Yeah, and how do you try and like obviously you get to talk to people online that are not
Mhm.
just from Florida. In your conversations with people that happen to be, let's say, in my own state, I'm in New York right now.
Mhm.
We're a pretty safe blue state. Do you
Yeah.
think the people there who are right now considering voting third party should still be voting for the Democrat? Like, would you try and advocate for them, or would you just say, you know what, I understand it. I'm gonna not try and convert you to being a voter for Joe Biden this year? Do you think it matters if people in New York that are potentially third party voters vote blue or vote third party?
What I tell more independent voters, third party voters in places like New York, California, etc., is that your state projectively will go towards Joe Biden or Donald Trump or whoever it is.
Yeah.
And you have the freedom to choose whoever you want. If you are choosing to vote for Joe Biden, despite the fact that you don't terribly really like him or Kamala Harris or whatever, it is out of solidarity with progressives, moderates, and conservative Republicans who are voting for Joe Biden for a serious change for the country. It's out of solidarity. In the case of swing states like my own, I mean, there really are effectively three choices. Vote for Joe Biden to take out Trump. If you're voting for Trump, you really do have to justify his response to the COVID crisis. That more than anything, with over 180,000 deaths. And if you do make a moral choice to write in or vote third party, it is your choice, but there is a moral weight to it. And I've seen videos from some YouTube channel called Republican Voters Against Trump, and I see like a lot of people who voted for Gary Johnson in 2016, lifelong Republicans, and they're saying this time around I'll vote for Biden. So Um, that's all I can really say. If you're in a swing state, it really is a choice. It
Yeah.
is
Do you think
it's a
it makes a
choice.
difference though? Like for example, I've heard people who say we still need those blue state voters because they have this fear that if we don't truly smack Trump with the popular vote in addition to winning the electoral college, he's just not going to vacate the White House. Do you think that is part of like a valid concern that we need to like pile up the numbers in the popular vote, or do you think it's better to not try and like vote shame those third party voters into going with the Democrats?
I've heard that arguments, including from Republican voters and Republican voters for Joe Biden. And I would say this: it's not worth the energy chasing those votes. The focus should be on the swing states, the traditional swing states, Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Michigan, Nevada, New Mexico, Virginia. Maine has a special district. Nebraska has a special district. And in addition to that, this year, Georgia and Texas are in play, which is unusual.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you on those points. I think that would be a huge win if we could pull off Texas. But let me ask you this final question before we wrap up, specifically on the People's Party itself. You know, you said you got to see a couple of the key speakers. How do you feel about the People's Party? Obviously, we got to talk to them. I generally like a lot of what they have in their platform, but I have a concern that I feel that they're largely pretty much the same as the Green Party in most respects of who their ideological composition falls into. Do you think that is going to have legs, or do you see differences of why they may have went that way compared to like joining forces with one of these already existing third parties?
Well, I think when we saw Bernie Sanders, resign, give up the presidential race the second time around this year, I was thinking maybe they would gravitate towards the Green Party, but we're not seeing that. And if there's a reason for that, it's because there are people who are just so disillusioned with not just the two-party system, but also the Green Party itself.
Hmm.
And I've seen videos of Howie Hawkins. He seems like an upstanding guy, definitely. And it kind of does surprise me that they are not going towards him, at least out of principle, and instead discussing forming a new party. And in the years to come, the People's Party, they will get people who are, disillusioned Democrats, 2022, 2024, but they will also compete with the Green Party for not just candidates but also voters. So we will have to see how much the People's Party could take from the Democratic Party. And there is one metric that we can use. I looked into it. 2016, there were about 12.5 million Bernie voters,
Yeah.
and that fell to like 8.5 million about in this year. So there was like almost a 33% drop right there. And then I read some polls going back to around the end of April, right after Bernie Sanders had, called it quits on the race, that 77% of his voters then were likely going to be, voting for Joe Biden in the end. A good number of them could be in swing states. Who knows? And if you really look at it, that leaves about approximately 2 million voters who are still disgruntled. They are just dissatisfied with everyone. So I don't know how many are in safe states like California, New York, things like that. How many are in swing states? But if the People's Party has a base of support, it likely will come from that 2 million plus others who are actually voting for Joe Biden.
I think that's a pretty apt analysis. You know, I being one of the people who got to watch it live, I went back and afterwards tried to compare what the viewership numbers were for their convention compared to the Green Party. I'll give them credit. They're going to do better than the Green Party. I'm going to say that now. I'm going to put myself on the record. It was around 11 times the viewership in terms of convention watching. So I kind of see this as a Green Party 2.0. And some of my concerns were mainly one line that they got to use kind of frequently at the convention was part of their short term strategy is that they wanted to force the Democratic Party into coalition governing. And the only way you pressure the Democratic Party into coalition governing is if they lose without you. Like that's the only way they're going to realize, oh, we need to make a coalition with you to secure a win. And so that concerns me because I think a lot of the people I've seen in that movement, and it was actually mixed at the convention. Some people were backing the vote your conscience type approach. Some had said, you know what, I support Joe Biden being the person. But a lot of these people are kind of this accelerationist type that think that we need to take some losses for people to wake up. How do you feel about that accelerationism? Do you think there is any merit to what they say in that we have to have this kind of, again, neoliberal, they see Joe Biden very similarly to Hillary Clinton, lose again for people to kind of wake up that that style of governing doesn't work?
I think, honestly, the opposite could happen. If Donald Trump does squeak out another victory, and it's very, very close, I've heard people complain that the Democrats, the establishment would just blame these third-party voters. But the biggest thing is this: I think the people who would be voting third party in swing states simply out of spite, in those cases, if it's out of spite, and then you see Donald Trump, he gets reelected, and they find some kind of vindication, and then they see Donald Trump going over the next 4 years, and we already have 180,000 COVID deaths, and then they're going to see that go up and up and up until there is a vaccine that's widely available. And that's why I say, like in the swing states, like there is a real choice. There's an ethical problem. You ever heard of the trolley problem?
Oh yeah, yep.
This is like a real life example of the trolley problem, but there are 3 people holding switches. 2 people hold switches that will change things, and the other one is holding a switch that doesn't affect the results, the safe states, right? So you know that one person is going to go there for sure, and then the other person has to make a choice. Does it matter? Does it not matter? They have to really figure that out as a country, we do need to come together. This COVID-19 crisis is very, very serious, and like all I can say is that when November comes around, when you cast your ballots, we really, really, really do have to work together because it doesn't just end with the Trump presidency. Come January 20th, 2021, Joe Biden comes in. There's going to be a lot of work to do. There's going to be a lot of work to do. And in a sense, we could see coalition governing in a different respect, is that it's not so much the third parties, but it's the wings of the Democratic Party, the Progressive Caucus, which I believe there are 95 members right now, plus a few more.
Although I wouldn't classify them all as solid progressive caucus.
They're not
block vote. Like
they're not.
Can be a little bit more flaky. But to your point, I actually think it was very well said when you said it's not going to just end with the Trump presidency.
Absolutely, yeah.
And what I was thinking, if he gets another term, he's going to get even more judges through. I think there was a metric, something like he had 25% of all federal judges have been appointed under Trump.
In 3.5 years.
Yeah, and that number is only going to go up. And I ask any progressive voter out there, do you think your policies, the ones you care most about, are going to be held up as constitutional under a conservative court system. Single payer healthcare. Do you really think they're going to allow you to have that duplicative coverage ban? Do you really think they're going to allow you to have a wealth tax? Like, these are things that you have to ask yourself. The courts matter, and there are so many other policies that we can cover. I think this accelerationism also just fails to meet the mark of like understanding how the general populace psyche works. Like, think about it this way. You know, one way or another, most people see Democratic Party left wing. It might not be, but they see it as left wing. Republican Party right wing. And by reconfirming Trump, we're saying we see this nation as a little bit more conservative. It reaffirms that that is where America wants to go. Like Joe Biden or not, think he's center right or not, the Democratic Party winning indicates that the country wants to move a little left. And guess what? We can maybe move even more left after that point.
Yep.
So I don't feel like you're signing up for 12 years when you vote for Joe Biden. You're voting for 4. That's it. You're voting for 4 years, and you're voting for Trump to be gone. And that's why even in a safe blue state, I'm still going to be casting that vote of solidarity with the rest of the nation.
I appreciate that, John.
Yeah, I feel bad for you, Nelson. Like, if you were one of those people who's a little bit more anti-establishment, you'd be sweating right now. But luckily, you know what the right vote is here, and I want.
Yeah, of course. I mean, you know, you think about. I also think about it this way: is that people who are anti-establishment, they don't have the resources to take on both parties right now.
Yeah.
If Biden wins with a sizable number of Republican moderates, that would definitely send the GOP into a shock, and they're going to have to reevaluate, you know, policies, what voters to appeal to, things like that, and those voters will not be there in 2024. They will likely go back to the GOP with a more moderate candidate in 2024, and over the next 4 years, a Biden-Harris administration will actually have to make serious concessions to progressives, at the very least on those Biden-Sanders compromises.
Yeah.
At the very least, like $15 minimum wage, universal pre-K, 12 weeks maternity leave. There's
a lot in there. There's
a lot.
10-page document of what that created.
There's a lot of stuff in there.
Anyone who's on the fence, please just go read that. It'll be like, wow, I did not know that was there. At the least, go read his website. Like, the amount of people I know that have not actually taken a moment to check out his policy is astounding. They feel like, you know, he's just this basic Republican, maybe Republican light.
Yeah.
Just check it out. That's all I'm going to say. But with that being said, Nelson, I wanted to thank you so much for being here today to be able to talk democracy and the conventions. I think it's so important, and we look forward to reading when you do finalize that article on mail-in voting, all the ways we can be able to improve that. Is there anything else that you want to make sure the listeners right now can go check out if they enjoyed hearing what we had to say today on democracy?
Well, I mean, I would just say check out the hillofroses.com website. There are still a lot of articles out there that have already been, you know, published on the website. And we do have more articles and more content to come within the next few weeks. So actually, the next couple of months, because we have less than 70 days. I forget what it is now, like 65 or so.
Yeah, I think we're at 61.
61, yeah. like 61 days or something absurd. 62,
maybe.
Something.
A number of days above 60.
64.
Yeah.
It is 64. It's like, you know, so the 7 plus 1, 64. Yeah. So we have only so much time. Register to vote by mail. Vote early. Go to the post office. Better yet, go to your supervisor of elections or wherever you can in your county.
I do something.
Yeah. Not every state provides the free postage on the return ballots. So.
Okay. Well, Nelson, as always, we appreciate you coming on, and we appreciate the work you're doing for the Hill of Roses. You're welcome to come back anytime, and I know we will get to have you on as we get even closer and closer to that final decision being made. But I hope you have a great rest of your night, and again, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone. That was Nelson Orta. We got to have a wonderful conversation today on the subject of democracy, whether it be mail-in voting and preserving our mail system, or if it's the general conventions that we've went through and the idea of alternative parties. There was a lot that we got to cover, and we love to talk about democracy. With that being said, let's tell you what we got going on for the rest of the week. Tomorrow, we're going to be having on more contributors from the Hill of Roses. We're going to be having on Grayson Asbeth as well as Michael Leone, and we're going to be talking very specifically about the Trump strategy. What is he trying to do to help get himself elected? We think it's important to understand what the strategy of opposition is so that we know how we can properly counter that. Then we're going to be having a conversation on Wednesday with Christy Seelock. You might know her as Viz Vizarant on Twitter. She is running for the Senate in 2022. And so we want to talk to her about the prospects of her campaign. Then on Thursday, we'll be talking to Michael Madrid. He's a libertarian running in New York's 10th district. I wanted to talk to him about, libertarianism and how that can kind of not necessarily be left libertarianism, but have these pragmatic goals that we still share. Like, for example, he still supports universal basic income. And we know that from the Democratic primaries, neither of the candidates that we got to interview on the program of Lindsey Boyland and Jonathan Herzog made it through. We have Gerald Nadler. So he'll be making his case of why he thinks he'll do a better job than Gerald Nadler. And then finally, to wrap up the week, we got a big event. We're doing our candidate supporter debate again. We're having on supporters of Donald Trump, of Joe Biden, of Howie Hawkins, of Joe Jorgensen, and of Mark Charles. If you remember him from our program, he's an independent running for office. So Friday, 9 p.m. Eastern time, we're doing our candidate supporter debate, and I cannot wait. Again, all of this content will be at 9 p.m. Eastern time, as always. And if you like today's video, please make sure that you go share it, give a like to the video, and make sure that you subscribe and hit the bell so you're notified whenever any of our videos go live. With that being said, my friends, thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. I hope you all are staying safe out there. I love you all for helping to continue grow this movement. And as always, I hope you guys are staying rosy out there.